Namaskar. Welcome to the course Current Regulatory Requirements for Conducting Clinical Trials in India for Investigational New Drug and New Drug. This is the version 2. Today I will take you through lecture 18, which is the post marketing assessment and clinical trial compensation. So, one of the part of this lecture 18 is the post market assessment, which is related once the drug is manufactured and marketed for sale and distribution in India, or it is imported for sale and distribution in India. That is also related to the new drug, and also for any drugs manufactured and marketed or imported and marketed in India. And the other part is the clinical trial compensation, which is related to the clinical trial before the drug is approved for marketing in India. So, the lecture has two different parts. So, what is the learning objectives? What we are going to learn? The post market assessment of new drug, how it is conducted, what are the different requirements or what we do in post market assessment of new drug, and there is a compensation mechanism for clinical trial in the country and the formula to determine this compensation. We start with the post market assessment. So, as already has been told many times for other parts of this course, so you may be knowing that the new drug and the clinical trial rules, they have various chapters, various rules under these chapters, as well as the various schedules. So, there are 13 chapters in this new drugs and clinical trial rules, and under these 13 chapters there are 107 rules which describe the different requirements for the requirements for applications, requirements for conditions to be fulfilled, the different forms, formats what are to be filled. These are all the requirements of the clinical trials and the requirements for the ethics committee for the different parts of any new drug and clinical trials related issues are covered under these 107 rules in these 13 chapters, and also there is 8 schedules which have the various requirements for the specific requirements under each of these rules. So, now we come to the post market assessment, which is the 5th schedule in this new drug and clinical trial rules. So, what is this post market assessment of new drug? So, we have approved the new drugs has passed the clinical trial, has proved its safety and efficacy, and now it has been marketed. So, when it is marketed, there is a requirement of post market assessment. It is not finished that when if it has gone through the clinical trial means the drug is ready for marketing. It does not mean the drug has proved completely its safety and efficacy. There are many other issues. What are these issues? What are the things? What are the concerns? Because when we approve a new drug when we approve the new drug through a clinical trial, it is through a controlled clinical setting where the clinical trial is conducted in a limited number of patients. Many times these are only studied under randomized clinical trials, and there are many cases like the high risk patients and patients with concomitant illnesses that require the use of the other drugs. Then there are different age group of patients like the geriatric patients, the pediatrics, the lactating woman, the pregnant woman, and the patients with some diseases like the kidney, for the disease, special diseases like renal diseases or other comorbidities. Such type of patients are not included initially in a clinical trial. So, these patients are excluded in the normal clinical trial where the clinical trial of the new drug is conducted only in limited number of patients with a specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. So, what is required now, and these patients as they are excluded in this clinical trial, and further now when the drugs are approved for marketing for sale and distribution in the country, then comes the actual patient population. And also when there is a clinical trial, these patients whom these clinical trials are conducted, the limited number of patients, they are closely monitored for evidence of adverse events. What happens in actual clinical practice? The monitoring is less intensive, a broader range of patients which are treated with the age groups, comorbidities, there may be some genetic abnormalities, like there may be defective in the enzymatic system, there may be different other genetic diseases. So, these patient groups come in the actual real clinical which is a real world situation, we may call it a real world situation. And then there are events which are too rare to occur in a clinical trials may be observed. Therefore, subsequent to approval of a new drug, the drug has to be closely monitored and the post marketing assessment has to be done to establish the benefit risk profile. The drug is released or approved for marketing in the country when the benefit outweighs risk, but it is to establish further the benefit risk profile of this drug. So, in this post marketing system, what are the different things which are to be done? A person who is intending to import or manufacture any new drug for sale or distribution, they have to have a pharmacovigilance system in place for collecting, processing and forwarding the adverse drug reaction report to the central licensing authority emerging from the use of this drug imported or manufactured or marketed by the applicant in the country. So, who is the central licensing authority? That is the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, who approves drugs for import or manufacturing, any new drug for import or manufacturing in the country. And the pharmacovigilance system, as already defined in the new drug and the clinical trial rules, it says that it is the science, it is defined, the new drug and the clinical trial rules also define the pharmacovigilance system in the country, and which means the science and the activities for detection, assessment, understanding and prevention of drug related problems or adverse effects of drugs. So, in case the drugs are permitted for marketing in the country, so every such license holder has to have a pharmacovigilance system in place. The pharmacovigilance system, what is said in this under this post marketing assessment, that the pharmacovigilance system shall be managed by qualified and trained personnel, and the qualification for such person shall be, like, they are called the officer in charge for collection and processing of data, and they shall be a medical officer or a pharmacist who is trained in collection and analysis of adverse drug reaction reports. How this post market assessment of the new drug is now carried out? The post market assessment for the new drug is carried out by three different methods, we can say, which is given under this post market assessment. The one may be the post marketing trial, and this is, we call it at a phase 4 clinical trial. So, it is a clinical trial after marketing of the drug. So, it will include all the requirements of a clinical trial. So, it has to have a defined scientific objective, there has to be a clinical trial protocol, there has to be inclusion and exclusion criteria, and the drug has to be given to the patients under in the approved indications and to the patients for whom it is indicated. So, the drug given for the specific group of patients for whom the drug is approved under the approved indications, and also in such cases all the regulations and requirements of clinical trials are applicable, which includes the compensation in case of a clinical trial related injury or death, and also all the principles of good clinical practices. In such study, the subject may be provided, the subject should be provided the drug free of cost, and in case there is a cost incurred on the subject, then there has to be a reasons which is to be given by the applicant to the licensing authority to support that why the cost of the drug has been taken from the patient. Otherwise, the drug should be provided to the patient free of cost. Also, the other part of the post marketing. So, this is one, there can be a phase 4 clinical trial as it is said, and also there can be a post marketing surveillance study or observational or non-interventional study. So, what is this non-interventional study? By the word we can just say that it means that the drug is given to the patient in the real life situations, in the real world situations or the real life situations, that it is given to the patient in the under the prescription in the by the prescriber, and also when the patient with a specific indication. So, such studies are conducted with the drugs under the approved conditions of its use, and that has to be, it is also expected that there has to be a protocol with the scientific objective. Inclusion and exclusion criteria of the subject would be decided as recommended as per the prescribing information or the package insert, and that would be a such type of study would be a part of the treatment of the patient in the wisdom of the prescriber included in the protocol. So, the regulatory provisions and guidelines are not applicable in case of such studies. So, this is to establish further the safety of the drug. And also the other requirement, we come to this part C of the 5th schedule, which talks about the post marketing surveillance through periodic safety update reports. So, this particular requirements of post marketing surveillance through periodic safety update reports is already given under the conditions of permissions for a marketing or import of new drugs or investigational new drugs in the country. This is under the chapter 10 under rule 25, the 4 and the 5. These are the two conditions which says that as post marketing surveillance, the applicant has to, the manufacturer or the importer has to submit periodic safety update reports, and also under the specified conditions, as well as also in case of any adverse events, any adverse drug reaction or any serious unexpected adverse drug reactions reported for the new drug which is approved for import or marketing, it has to be analyzed, causality analysis has to be done, and this is to be reported to the licensing authority. So, these are the two conditions which are being given as the conditions of permissions for import or manufacturing of new drug in the country. In this periodic safety update reports, what is there in this periodic safety update reports? Let us see. The applicant shall furnish periodic safety update reports to report all the relevant new information about the drugs from the appropriate sources, and it should relate to the patient exposure. They have to summarize all the marketing authorization status of this drug in different other countries, and if there is any significant variations with respect to the safety of the drug. And it has to be also indicated whether changes shall be made to the product information in order to optimize the use of the product. So, what is the content of this periodic safety update report? It should also include ordinarily all dosage forms, all formulations of a particular drug, as well as all indications, all dosage forms, all formulations, all strengths, everything which is for a particular drug can be included as a part of one PSUR, and but only that the data for one particular dosage form. So, when we say dosage form, it means either a tablet or a capsule or an injectables. So, these are the different dosage forms. This has to be made in a separate, the data for each presentations has to be given separately, but within the same PSUR, and as also the, if it is indications, all, and also the separate populations need to be given. So, everything can be covered under one PSUR. Within the single PSUR, separate presentations of data for different dosage forms, indications, or separate populations, whether it is children, whether it is geriatric patients, this has to be given. All the relevant clinical and non-clinical safety data for the period of this submission of the periodic safety update reports has to be given. So, what is the interval for the submission of the periodic safety update reports once the drug is permitted for marketing in the country? So, it is 6 months for every 6 months for first 2 years, and then it is annual for the next. So, the total period of submission of any periodic safety update report for any drug which is manufactured or imported, new drug manufactured or imported in India is 4 years. So, a drug continues to be as a new drug in the country for 4 years. For subsequent 2 years, as it is said, it is to be annually, and also the PSUR due for a period must be submitted within 30 calendar days of the last day of the reporting period. However, all cases involving serious unexpected adverse events, if it happens during this period of reporting, it has to be reported within 15 days from the receipt of this information in all cases. And in case the marketing of the drug is delayed for some reasons, then in that case the date from where the marketing of the drug is started, the PSUR has to be submitted from that time onwards. So, if the marketing permission has been given and the marketing of the drug is delayed by 6 months, so it is after 6 months that your period of submission will also start from there, and your 4 years also will be counted from that time onwards. New studies specifically planned or conducted to examine further safety issues also has to be covered in the PSUR, but all cases it is said that it has to be within this specific period of reporting. So, if you have the 6 months period, what is the time period of your reporting? So, your any information related to this particular interval has to be submitted. So, structure of the periodic safety update report, it should be structured as follows. So, it has to be have a title page, an introduction. So, the information under the title page all are very important. So, any incomplete information relates to in this submission actually gives there is a problem when you analyze such data, when there is even the date of marketing of the drug, date of approval of the drug, everything has to be covered. Even if says the title page also has the same content and also the introduction, it should be filled completely, and due care should be taken when filling a PSUR. An incomplete PSUR is an incomplete submission to the regulatory authorities. So, the title page of PSUR should capture the name of the drug, reporting interval, the permitted indication of such drug, date of permission of the drug, date of marketing of the drug, licensing name and address. Also, in case of the introduction, also the reporting interval, drugs intended use, mode of action, therapeutic class, route of administration, formulation and a brief description of the approved indication and population. The current worldwide marketing status is to be informed in this narrative. There is a brief narrative where all the details of the countries where the drug is currently approved, and in case there has been the date of approval, the date of marketing, and if in case there are any safety issues or if the drug is withdrawn in such countries for some reasons, this is to be informed. And in case any action has been taken by anybody which is involved in this drug, like the sponsor or the country or the ethics committee or the data monitoring board, whosoever or any other regulatory issues in any country has arose in this reporting interval also has to be covered in this PSUR. If there has been any changes in the reference safety information due to various other interventions or due to some other studies which has come up in this, by the results of the studies which has come up during this period, or any countries who have raised any issues for some safety reasons, every information should be covered. So, that can lead to changes in the contraindications, warnings, precautions, adverse events and important findings from ongoing and completed clinical trials, and also any significant non-clinical findings. So, if some non-clinical studies have also been planned in this interval, then any findings from that non-clinical studies also should come up in this information. The estimated patient exposure, this section of the PSUR should provide the size and the nature of the population exposed to the drug. When you do this estimated patient exposure, there should be a brief description how this patient exposure has been calculated, and there has to be the cumulative. So, you add on how many patients were there in the clinical trial and during the interval subject exposure. If there has been a particular group of clinical trial patients during this interval. So, you have cumulative and interval subject exposure in the clinical trial, cumulative and interval patient exposure from the marketing experience in India, and cumulative and interval patient exposure covering this particular interval of the reporting from the marketing experience from other part of the globe, if it is marketed in other part of the globe. Also, there has to be presentation of individual case histories. When there is a adverse events reported, it has been analyzed, it has the causality assessment has been done, and that has to come as a brief case narrative along with the causality assessment. There has to be following information: prescribing information, individual cases received from India, individual cases received from the world, cumulative and interval summary tabulations. So, there has to be tabulations of the serious adverse events from the clinical investigations as well as the serious adverse events from the post marketing data sources. If there are studies conducted in this period, then it should come as a part of this section under the studies of the PSUR, which should capture the brief summary of the clinically important emerging efficacy or effectiveness and safety findings. So, if you use the word effectiveness, we mean, and so you may be knowing by this time what is the difference between the word efficacy and what is the difference and what is the meaning of the word effectiveness. So, when we say efficacy, it is in the clinical, the efficacy of the drug is always assessed in a controlled clinical trial settings, and when we say effectiveness, it means in the real life situation when the drug is used in a large number of patient population. So, you have to have all the informations if it is also done during this interval period. There may be some sponsored clinical trials done and whose report has come up during this interval period, or there may be published safety studies results which have also become available during this reporting period. So, all this will have an impact on the safety information of the new drug. So, you summarize significant safety findings from clinical trials during the reporting period, findings from non-interventional studies if it is there, findings from the non-clinical studies, and also findings from the literature. There may be other information. The section of the PSUR should include the details about the signals and risk management plan. So, you make a risk management plan assessing all the safety information for the new drug, and this basis of this risk management and the risk management plan comes out of your if there is any signal detection. So, you have a signal and risk evaluation section in which the license holder will provide the details of the signal if at all you have a specific adverse reactions reported, and you capture it as that this is related to the drug. So, you capture it as a signal. So, it in a very simple sentence or in a simple word, I can just explain there are different methods of assessing or detecting the signal, but the simplest way that when there is an adverse events reported and there are number of patients populations where the same adverse events have been reported, then there is a specific way to analyze these adverse events and capture it as a signal that this is the adverse events which is related to the use of this drug. So, that is called signal detection, and accordingly you do your risk evaluation. So, you will have the summary of the safety concerns, benefit evaluation and the benefit risk analysis evaluation. Finally, the conclusion, the section of this section of the PSUR should provide the details on the safety profile of the drug and necessary action taken by the license holder. So, what are the actions which have been taken, whether you have suggested for some changes in the labels, changes in the safety information, changes in the different indications like indications, whether there has been some specific recommendations of use for the prescriber. So, all these kind of things will come up in the conclusion, and finally the appendix will include some of the regulatory documents like copy of marketing authorization in India, copy of prescribing information, line listings with the narrative of the individual case safety reports. Clinical trial compensation, and as I told before, the clinical trial compensation is related to the drug, new drug or investigational new drug when it is under clinical trial. That means it is under a controlled clinical trial settings, a clinical trial is being conducted, the various requirements which are to be fulfilled by the applicant. The rules, I would like to just say while going through this clinical trial compensation, already this has been said many times in this lecture. What is clinical trial? When we say clinical trial, which is in relation to a new drug or an investigational new drug, means any systematic study of this new drug or investigational new drug in human subjects to generate data for discovering or verifying the clinical or pharmacological, including pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. That means the response of the human body to the drug and the response of the drug to the human body. You can say in simple words, as well as adverse effects, with the objective of determining the safety, efficacy or tolerance of such new drug or investigational new drug in the patients. Just coming to this clinical trial compensation, the conditions of permissions for conduct of clinical trial, which is covered under chapter 5, under rule 25, it is said under this there are two para on this, or we can call them as a clause 11 and clause 12. So, it is said in this condition of permission for conduct of clinical trial that in case of injury during the clinical trial to the subject of such trial, complete medical management and compensation shall be provided in accordance with the chapter 6, and details of the compensation provided in such cases shall be intimated to the central licensing authority within 30 working days of the receipt of the order issued by the central licensing authority. And in the same way, it is said that in case of clinical trial related death or permanent disability of any subject of clinical trial during the trial, compensation shall be provided in accordance with the chapter 6 to the legal heirs, and that details of the compensation also has to be intimated to the central licensing authority within 30 working days of receipt of the order issued by the central licensing authority. So, these are the conditions of permissions of clinical trial, which is given in chapter 5, rule 25. In this compensation requirement, which is given as a condition of permission, what is written that it is to be done as per the chapter 6. So, coming to this chapter 6, there are rules 39, rule 40, 41, 42 and 43. These are the rules which describe the different requirements of compensation. The compensation in case of clinical trial related injury or a permanent disability or related or death, and in case the injury may not be a permanent disability, and also what would be the ways, what is expected from the clinical trial applicant for such cases, and also the undertaking which each applicant of a clinical trial has to give while submitting an applications for the clinical trial. So, let us first go through rule 39, which says about the compensation in case of injury or death in clinical trial. When there is a death or of a trial subject occurs during this clinical trial, then it is said that compensation has to be given. Complete financial compensation has to be provided by the sponsor or the representative. So, what is the representative? So, in case there is a foreign sponsor, there has to be a representative, Indian representative, or the sponsor can appoint some other organization as its representative to make an application to the Central Drug Control for a clinical trial. So, whosoever has obtained this permission of the clinical trial, they are liable to pay this compensation to the legal heir of the patients who has died during the clinical trial. The procedure is specified in rule 42. Now, when there is a permanent disability or any other injury which is occurring, which is not death, but it is an serious adverse events, but it is not death, in that case also the trial subject has to be provided financial compensation by the sponsor or its representative. And this financial compensation which has to be provided in case of a permanent disability or other injury, it has to be addition to the expenses which has incurred for the medical management. So, it is the various medical treatment which is being given to the subject when there is a reported clinical trial injury. In the event of an injury which is not being permanent in nature, when there is not a permanent nature, but still it is connected or it has been found to be related to the clinical trial, in that case the nature of the quantum of the compensation shall commensurate with the loss of wages of the subject as provided in the 7th schedule. So, then it is connected to the wage loss. In this connection, I would like to mention that this compensation rule is a very unique and very specific in case of the regulations of the clinical trial and very specific to India. Nowhere in the world any other rules which govern the clinical trial includes this compensation rule, or no other countries have these compensation rules provided as a task to the regulatory authorities. Here in this compensation rule, which is a part of this new drug clinical trial rules, there are various roles and responsibilities of various the sponsor, the investigator, the ethics committee, the independent expert committee which is to be constituted by Government of India for examining the compensation, as well as the central licensing authority. Everybody has specific rules which is very clearly specified in this new drug and clinical trial rules, whereas throughout the world in the other regulatory provisions, in the other regulatory, in other regulations in the world, such compensations or the authority of compensation, the owners of the compensation or calculation of the compensation is not given to the regulatory agency. The regulatory agency does not perform this function other than the regulatory provisions which is given in this law, in the new drugs and the clinical trial rules in case of the Indian regulations. What is said further, that the sponsor or the representative has to give an undertaking with the applications for the clinical trials to provide compensation in case of a clinical trial related injury or death. And in case the sponsor or its representative fails to provide the compensation, then after giving an opportunity of being heard, the licensing authority can suspend or cancel the permission of the clinical trial given to this sponsor, as well as it can be also like this, the sponsor can be debarred for certain period or any other appropriate action can be taken by the licensing authority. So, what is written under Rule 40? In coming to this Rule 40, it talks about the medical management. So, when there is an injury occurred to a clinical trial subject, it is said that free medical management has to be given to the subject as long as or as per the opinion of the investigator, or till such time it is not established that the injury is not related to the clinical trial. So, free medical management has to be given as per the decision of the investigator, and till such time it has been not taken or it has not been decided by a causality assessment that the injury is not related to the trial or related to the drug. The responsibility of the medical management is also has to be discharged by the sponsor or his representative who has made this clinical trial application and has obtained the clinical trial application. And in the same way, in case they fail to provide the medical management, after being given an opportunity to heard, the permission for the clinical trial can be cancelled, suspended, or it can be the sponsor can be debarred, or some specific action can be taken as deemed fit by the regulatory authority. Coming to the Rule 41, when we consider, so how you say, how you do this causality assessment, or how you decide whether the clinical trial injury is related to the clinical trial, whether the injury or the death or permanent disability, whatever are related to trial, are related to this particular clinical trial of the new drug or the investigational new drug. To decide on this, it has been the conditions for the various reasons where it would be considered that it is related to the new drug or the related to the clinical trial. It is said that in case the adverse effect, when there is an adverse effect of the investigational product, it would be considered that it is related to the new drug. Similarly, when there is a violation of the approved protocol, there is a scientific misconduct or negligence by the sponsor and it is proved, then in that case which may have led to the serious adverse event. So, in that case also it would be considered that the injury or the death or the permanent disability is related to the study. It is occurring during the clinical study due to any of the following reasons. So, any injury or death or permanent disability of a trial subject occurring during the clinical trial due to any of these following reasons shall be considered as a clinical trial study related injury or death or permanent disability. So, what are these conditions? What are the reasons? Adverse effect of the investigational product, when there is an adverse effect due to the investigational product, when there is a violation of the approved protocol, and there is a scientific misconduct or negligence by the sponsor or his representative or by the investigator which has led to the serious adverse events. So, that would be also considered related to the clinical trial. When there is a failure of the investigational product to provide the intended therapeutic effect and where there was a standard care or rescue medications already included in the protocol, but that was not provided to the trial subject, it would be considered as a clinical trial related injury. And also in case the standard care has not been provided, though it was included in the clinical trial protocol in a placebo controlled trial when it was required. And also any adverse events or adverse effects due to the concomitant medications which is included as a part of the clinical trial protocol, and if such medications also has led to some adverse effects, it would be considered as a clinical trial related injury. Also, when there is an adverse effect on a child in an utero because of the participation of the parent in the clinical trial. So, that case also it has to be related to the, it is related to the clinical trial, and any clinical trial procedures which is a part of the protocol that has led to this such injury. What does the rule 42 says? Procedure for compensation in case of such injury. The procedure means what is the timeline of reporting, how the decision would be taken by the regulatory authorities on the basis. So, the roles and the responsibilities of the various participants of the clinical trial, the sponsor, the investigator, the ethics committee, the regulatory agency. So, the investigator shall report all serious adverse events to the central licensing authority, that is Central Drug Standard Control Organization, to Drugs Controller General India, and the sponsor and the ethics committee. The investigator has to report all serious adverse events to the regulatory authority, to the sponsor or its representative who has obtained permission from the licensing authority for conduct of clinical trial, and also to the ethics committee who has accorded approval to the study protocol within 24 hours of their occurrence. And if the investigator fails to report these adverse events within this stipulated period of 24 hours, then he has to furnish the reasons for such delay to the satisfaction of the central licensing authority and along with the report of the SAE. In case the SAE has been reported, then such SAE has to be examined by an independent expert committee which would be constituted by the central licensing authority to examine the cases and to make its recommendation to the said authority for arriving at the cause of death and quantum of compensation which has to be given. The sponsor or the representative of the investigator or its representative and the investigator shall forward the reports on the SAE along with the due analysis of such SAE to the head of the institution where the clinical trial has been conducted within 14 days too. So, the sponsor and its representative and the investigator has to forward its report on SAE of death after due analysis of their due analysis, causality analysis, whatever is possible in the circumstances, to the central licensing authority and the head of the institution within the 14 days of the knowledge of occurrence of serious adverse events. And similarly, the ethics committee whom the investigator has supposed to report within 24 hours has to furnish its reports along with the analysis on its opinion on the financial compensation to and the financial compensations, how it has to be calculated is given in the 7th schedule. So, along with this opinion, this has to be furnished to the central licensing authority within a period of 30 days. The central licensing authority shall forward the report of the investigator, sponsor or its representative and the ethics committee to the chairperson of the expert committee for the analysis, and the expert committee shall examine and give their views within 60 days. And the expert committee, while examining this event, may take into consideration the reports of the investigator, sponsor as well as the report of the ethics committee who is responsible for giving permission to this study. In case of clinical trial related death, the expert committee shall recommend the quantum of the compensation determined in accordance with the formula which is specified in the 7th schedule, and based on the recommendation of the expert committee, the CLA shall consider these recommendations and shall determine the cause of death with regard to the relatedness of the death to the clinical trial as the case may be. In case of clinical trial related death, the CLA, after considering all these recommendations, it is required to pass an order within 90 days. This order has to be sent to the sponsor or its representative, and the sponsor or the representative, after getting such order from the CLA, shall pay the compensation within a period of 30 days. So, the timelines for the various actions are specified in these compensation rules. In case of serious adverse events of permanent disability or any other injury other than the death, in that case the timeline would be the same for reporting the serious adverse events, and in that case the sponsor or its representative and the investigator shall forward their reports of the serious adverse events after due analysis to the central licensing authority, to the chairperson of the ethics committee for clinical trial and the head of the institution within the 14 days of reporting of the SAE. The ethics committee in the similarly after due analysis shall forward their report within 30 days to the central licensing authority about their opinion on the financial compensation. The ethics committee will give specific recommendation after the due analysis of such report within the and with its opinion on the financial compensation, and the CLA after this determining after considering all the report, they shall determine the cause of the injury and pass an order as per the or in that case no, the process which is to be done is that such order the CLA themselves may pass or may constitute an independent expert committee to decide on this particular to examine the SAE or the related injury report, and such expert committee may recommend to the CLA for the purpose to arrive at the cause of the SAE and also the quantum of the compensation. This was to be done. This independent expert committee will examine this SAE report within a period of 60 days of the receipt of the report. In case of the clinical trial related injury, finally the decision on the quantum of compensation and the other decision would be made based on the various recommendations of the various entities. It has to be made within a period of 90 days of the receipt of the report of the SAE. Once the report of the report for payment of compensation is received by the sponsor has to pay the compensation within 30 days. So, these are the various timelines of 24 hours, 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days and the payment of the compensation of 30 days which are specified in the new drug and the clinical trial rules. To ensure that the patients is looked into, the clinical trial subjects are taken care of, and whenever there is a harm when there is a harm caused or there is a safety concerns or when there is a harm caused due to a clinical trial to a subject, adequate compensation has been paid to the trial subject. To ensure that adequate compensation, proper compensation and proper care has been taken to the clinical trial subject, this compensation rules has been made with specific timelines and also with the various formula for calculating the compensation. When we go to the 7th schedule, we will see how the compensation formula is calculated in case of SAE, the death due to the SAE, when there is a permanent disability due to the SAE serious adverse events, and in case there is other than permanent disability, but there is still non-SAE, non-death case and the death case. So, there are death SAE causing death and there is an SAE which may not cause death, but there is a permanent disability. So, such cases how the compensation formula has been made, which is very exclusive and unique in this global regulations, and it is only very much it is applicable only in case of India. It is a Indian rule and the Indian law which has made a very specific compensation formula. Coming to the Rule 43, which talks about the medical management and the compensation for injury or death relating to the biomedical research and health research. So, when there is a research, when there is a clinical trial which is not a regulatory clinical trial, but it is conducted by various research institution for the purpose of the research, or which is related to the various academics or the hospitals which are do some studies related to the already approved new drug for some specific new indications or for some specific use or for a new dosage form, such kind of, or which is done for the purpose of the research, such clinical trial, these are monitored, and these are monitored by the ethics committee as per the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research. So, this national and the ethics committee are such ethics committee who looks after this academic clinical trial or the clinical trial for the research purpose, are also approved by the Department of Health Research, Biomedical and Health Research, and in that case the compensations, the whatever has to be provided are provided as per the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research involving human participants, which is specified by the Indian Council of Medical Research. So, all the Rule 43 is the exclusive rule for the medical management and compensation in case of the clinical research. In that case, the ethics committee, which is approved by the Department of Health Research, they look after this compensation, the compensation which is to be provided in case of such trial subject who are involved in the clinical research. That means it is not for the new drug, it is already for the drug which is already approved and it is being used now for some other new indications or for research purpose. In case of that, the compensation is decided as per the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research, and that is being monitored by the ethics committee constituted for such purpose. Coming to this clinical trial compensation formula, which is covered under the same rules, rules 39, 40 and 42 mention about this compensation formula, and this is under the 7th schedule of the new drug and the clinical trial rules. It gives the formula in case of the clinical trial related death. The compensation formula, if you see, it says about a base amount, that is which is being decided, this 8 lakhs base amount. If you see the compensation formula, which says about a base amount which is 8 lakhs and it is decided on the basis of the wages of unskilled labor in the city of Delhi. So, it is based on wages calculation. There is a factor which is depending on the age of the trial subject, and there is an annexure subsequent to this which based on this Workmen Compensation Act, and then there is a R is the risk factor depending on the seriousness and severity of the disease, presence of comorbidity and duration of the disease of the trial subject at the time of enrollment in the clinical trial, and this has been decided between a scale of 0.5 to 4 as under. So, when we say 0.5, it means terminally ill patient, expected survival not more than 6 months. If when a scale of 1 means patient with high risk, expected survival between 6 to 24 months. A 2 is a patient with moderate risk, a 3 is a patient with mild risk, and 4 means healthy volunteers or trial subject of no risk. However, in case of patients whose expected mortality is 90% or more within 30 days, in that case a fixed amount of 2 lakhs to be given. So, these are which is included in the compensation formula and the compensation amount which is being included in the 7th schedule. The formula in case of clinical trial related injury other than death, for calculation of the quantum of this compensation related to injury other than death, the compensation is linked to the criteria which is considered in the calculation of the compensation in case of death. Because why it is done? This is important to ensure that the quantum of the compensation in case of the clinical trial related SE should not exceed the quantum of the compensation which should have been due for payment in case of death of the trial subject, since the loss of life is the maximum injury possible. So, always the compensation due to clinical trial related injury will be always less than the compensation due to death of a trial subject which is paid to the legal heirs. As per the definition of this SAE, the following sequelae other than the death are possible in a clinical trial subject in which the trial subject shall be entitled for compensation. And what is that? A permanent disability in case of the serious adverse events causing permanent disability to the trial subject, the quantum of the compensation in case of 100% disability shall be 90% of the compensation which would have been due for payment to the nominee in case of death of the trial subject. So, as it is said that it is being decided that always such compensation which is being paid, it should be less than the one if there was a death due to the trial subject. The quantum for less than 100% disability will be proportional to the actual percentage disability the trial subject has suffered. And also there is a formula for this, for the determination of the compensation, where the percentage disability which has to be decided by the experts. This percentage disability of the trial subject is considered as D and C. So, this is the compensation formula, if you can look into it, and in that the quantum of compensation which have been due for payment to the trial subject's nominee in case of death of the trial subject is the C. So, this is the compensation formula in case of permanent disability. In case of congenital anomaly or birth defect, it has been decided that if such defect has occurred, in that case following situations may arise due to the congenital anomaly or a birth defect like stillbirth, early death due to anomaly, or no death but deformity which can be fully corrected through appropriate intervention, or there may be a permanent disability, mental or physical. So, considering these 4 anomalies due to or a birth defect, the compensation in such cases would be a lump sum amount, such that if that amount is kept by fixed deposit or alike, it shall bring a monthly interest amount which is approximately equivalent to half of the minimum wage of the unskilled worker. So, that is the way the calculation has been made, and in all cases however, the medical management as long as required shall be provided by the sponsor. So, that is the formula says. Also, there may be chronic life threatening disease and reversible SE in case it is resolved. In case of clinical trial related SE causing life threatening disease and reversible SE, in case it is resolved, the quantum of compensation will be again linked to the number of days of the hospitalization of the trial subject, and accordingly based on the loss of wage the calculation has been decided. So, this is the formula which is being followed for this. This is the formula which is given in the compensation rule, where W will be the minimum wage per day of the unskilled worker and the number of days of hospitalization. Also, coming to this, it is also said that the wage loss per day shall be calculated based upon the minimum wage of the unskilled worker. In case of hospitalization of any patient, not only the patient loses his wage, also there will be a direct or indirect losses of various kind, including inconvenience, wage loss of attendant, etc. In that case, the compensation per day of hospitalization shall be double the minimum wage. So, these are the calculations which have been provided. There was an executive order earlier previous to these new drug and clinical trial rules for making this compensation calculation for all the clinical trial related reported SAEs, and now this has been put into this 7th schedule of the new drug and clinical trial rule. This is the annexure with the risk factor depending on the age, how the risk factor has been put, and also. So, finally, coming to the summary, what we have learnt in this lecture 18? We briefly learnt about post marketing assessment of new drug. What is the clinical trial compensation? What do we mean by clinical trial compensation? What are the different types of compensation which are being given in case of a death, permanent disability or clinical trial related injury, when there is something which is when a disability has taken place due to the clinical trial, when there is a congenital birth defect, when there is a chronic life threatening disease, and what are the different birth defects. So, everything has been elaborately included in this formula to understand and to make this compensation rule fruitful. How the clinical trial compensation is calculated is made based on this decision. So, let us recap what we have learnt now. So, going to this, let us go to the question number 1. Is it necessary for any person intending to import, manufacture in any new drug for sale distribution to have a pharmacovigilance system in place for collecting, processing and forwarding the adverse drug reaction report to CLA emerging from the use of the drug imported, manufactured, marketed by the applicant in the country? I think you have by this time known the answer. So, the answer is ready. Let us see what is the answer. Yes, it is absolutely necessary, isn't it? Is there anything called reversible SE? I hope the answer is with you. Yes. Let us go to the next question. Is the clinical trial compensation related to death same as related to clinical trial related injury? You know the answer. What is the answer? No. Did you write yes? No, it is not the same. Clinical trial related compensation due to death is not same as related to clinical trial related injury. Coming to the fourth question, state true or false. Post marketing surveillance is also carried out through periodic safety update reports. Very easy. You may give the answer. True. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture. If you have any comments, any feedback, any suggestion, you are free to write to us. Please give your feedback, suggestion, writing to us so that we can improve upon it. Thank you and all the best wishes for you.